Well, folks, thanks so much for joining us again. And just to put everybody at ease, if you were getting worried, no, we did not disappear. I was off air for a couple of days, had meetings at Mar-a-Lago, and which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. But thanks for the concern. We're still with you and still trying to give you and get to you every day, Monday to Friday, and a wrap up on Saturday of the week. So jumping right in, Mar-a-Lago was an amazing time, full day of meetings going on there. I won't take a lot of time on the podcast here to talk about it. Iran definitely was a key item of discussion, and we were to be meeting with President Trump and also Reza Pahlavi, who is the son of the former Shah of Iran. Anyway, lots of concerns there. Trump had to get back to Washington, D.C. with Reza Pahlavi related to Iran and some of the warnings that were going on there. So that was understandable. The meetings were very good and really talking a lot about one of the things that was discussed, the fact that mainstream media does not give a ton of attention until just the last few days to the whole situation in Iran, one of the most vicious and notorious terrorist governments ever that has existed. Reports were coming out that people were being killed by the thousands. One of the things that we heard from people who were from Iran, who were at our meetings, was there's a real rise in the amount of Iranians, apparently, that are turning to Christianity. They're actually converting to Christianity. And people were asking, is that one of the reasons why mainstream media doesn't like to give it a whole lot of coverage, because they don't like the thought that there can be faith abounding and prospering in any society? Look, I don't know if that's the answer, but we do know that on the streets of Iran, they want the extremist Islamists out of there. That includes those people in Iran who identify as Muslim. They want these murderers out, and they say they certainly would be helped if mainstream media would raise the issue a little more, but mainstream media is not all as concerned as we would want to see. In Canada, it's getting international attention that Canada's Prime Minister went to China to start negotiations and discussions, or continue them, so that Canada could draw even closer to Canada than Canada was while it was under the prime ministership of people like Prime Minister Jean Chrétien and others. And the liberal hierarchy in Canada has always had a soft spot for China that goes back a long way. And some of the media in Canada were saying, well, one of the good things about relationships with China is that they are predictable. It's a much more predictable relationship. Yes, it is predictable. Persecution in China is very predictable. Churches will be shut down. The ongoing persecution against the Uyghur Muslim-based population, yes, you can count on that. Very predictable. Yes, you will be arrested and thrown in jail if you have outspoken views about the government. Very predictable, of course. The most extensive spy network in the world, yes, very predictable. Very predictable that China, at first opportunity, will attack and try to conquer Taiwan. So yes, China is predictable. Whether you think those are wonderful things to be predictable about, I'll leave that up to you. So there's a mixed report in terms of what kinds of gains were made or not in Canada's heightened and more vigorous pursuit of China. China had put vicious tariffs against one of Canada's main agricultural products, being canola, and apparently those have been significantly reduced. So we have the Premier of Saskatchewan, who was sitting beside the Prime Minister in the briefing meeting, saying that this was an improvement, but the Premier of Ontario is not happy at all, because Canada has lowered tariffs and restrictions on China-made EVs, electric vehicles. That's going to hurt the industry in Ontario. So there's definitely mixed feelings. Not everybody happy about what's going on in China. And interesting timing on this, there's a new book out by Nicholas Niarchos, and it's called Elements of Power, and it's an in-depth look at the lithium battery industry. And you might be thinking, why are you talking about that now? We're just talking about EVs in China. But of course, lithium batteries are essential to so much of our electrical industries, EVs, and others. And he goes into great length, the author here, talking about the supply chain, which China is developing a bit of a monopoly over when it comes to these so-called rare minerals. And when he talks about lithium, he describes it as the dirtiest supply chain in history, and talks about the human effects of lithium marketing and lithium mining, and especially when it's done by countries like China. So if you've got an EV, good for you, but please don't use it as virtue signaling. If you're saying it for any other reasons, that's fine. The lithium industry is now seen to be far more harmful on the environment even than drilling for natural gas and oil. So let's take a scientific approach to these discussions, and let's not try and walk around like saints because virtue signaling because we're maybe driving an electric car. It has its issues also. Our viewers around the world, especially from US, it got a lot of attention a few years ago when the so-called trucker convoy was moving across Canada and bringing great protest to Ottawa for so many of the clampdowns that were going on, especially related to what was happening with the whole so-called epidemic and COVID and vaxes and everything shutting down. That was a huge convoy, and as we know, the government of Canada, the Liberal government, for the first time in history, enacted huge attacks, if you want to say it, on individuals and on companies, and even freezing people's bank accounts. They used something called the Emergency Act. And a couple years ago, that was taken to court. Many people whose lives were totally maligned by the use of the Emergency Act. And the lower court ruled that the Emergency Act was excessive in terms of trying to shut down the trucker convoy. And so the federal government, of course, ran straight to the higher court, to the federal court. They have also now just come out with a ruling saying, yes, the Emergency Act was excessive. Government went way too far in terms of taking away people's human rights. Interesting, again, that mainstream media, when you look at the overall news, was pretty soft on the use of the Emergency Act. Many of the so-called talking heads in media were pretty soft on it, some even suggesting yes, it was appropriate that the Emergency Act was being brought in because, after all, these truckers were honking their horns a lot in Ottawa, and the bureaucrats weren't able to get sleep as usual. So right away, when the ruling came out, of course, everybody whose lives were so badly disrupted by the use of the Emergency Act were cheering, and the federal government immediately announced they're taking it straight to the Supreme Court. So hundreds of millions of dollars now continuing as the panicked federal Liberal government takes this to court. They can't abide the fact that they actually went too far with their Emergencies Act. Part of the reason that you're seeing, and I'm here in the United States right now, and people were asking me, they saw on US News the picture, the images of Albertans lining up by the thousands to sign, to get enough signatures to continue to move forward the discussion, even possible vote or referendum on, let's call it independence, you can call it sovereignty association, but would Alberta leave Canada? And it's even caught the attention of people here in the United States. As you know, I share every single one of the concerns that people have who want to see Alberta leave Canada, the ongoing atrocious multi-decade trashing of Alberta by federal governments, principally Liberal governments, out of Ottawa, has led to all kinds of terrible things, and people are wanting to separate. If I had to bet, and I'm not a betting person, not with money anyway, I'm going to bet that if it does get to a referendum, which I think they will get the votes, I don't think they're going to get their 50.1%. And all my friends who are involved in the independence movement, please don't get mad at me for saying that. I just don't think you're going to get the 50%. Too many people are focused on the fact that if it did pass, that then enters us into years and years of negotiation, court cases, federal government, First Nation issues. So Alberta would not be able to move to get the legal status to move and become an independent entity, possibly for years. This is if the referendum passed. And anytime you have uncertainty in a government, investment dries up almost overnight. So the economic wallop that Alberta would be hit with if they're successful in the vote and going through years and years of litigation before they could be independent, I just think is too much to bear. I think we should stand and fight hard for every single one of the grievances. There are ways to make Ottawa pay attention and even pay the price, and even we can bring other provinces over to our side in terms of raising these concerns. Let's see how it goes, but it's getting a lot of attention, even here in the United States. Again, the media to the left, look at the reporting that is coming out. Just scan the news, either internationally or nationally. And the culturally Marxist mainstream media still very critical of the U.S. Grabbing Maduro, the president of Venezuela, and bringing him forward on drug charges which actually, and keep this in mind, were brought by Joe Biden when he was president. It was brought by the Democrats, and it was Joe Biden actually that first put the bounty on Maduro's head. He was going to put a bounty, and I think it's up to $50 million now. I hope some of those Delta Force soldiers that risked their lives to go in and nab that guy are able to claim some of that reward. But keep in mind, it was a Democrat administration and a Democrat president, President Biden, who actually put out the bounty and said somebody should arrest this guy and he needs to be indicted. One of the things that mainstream media is really upset about, as the U.S. continues to intercept tankers, these huge oil tankers out of Venezuela, which are breaking the sanctions against oil to terrorist regimes. The oil that goes to places like Iran makes its way to Russia, becomes supportive of the worst forms of terrorism and drug trafficking that we've ever seen. Of course, 100,000 deaths per year in the United States alone of young people related to the drugs that come out of these narco-terrorist regimes. And so the latest complaint is that, well, one of the planes that was being used in the surveillance to direct the aircraft carrier to stop another oil tanker, it didn't have military markings on it. Oh, you bad, nasty Americans, you didn't paint the stars and stripes on your planes. So again, mainstream media always leaning with soft support to the worst actors in the world on these issues, and fascinating to see their latest concern. Well, you heard first, or you heard earlier than most media were broadcasting about Maria Machado. Some people pronounce her name Machado. She was the opposition leader in Venezuela, and of course had to go into hiding, and the government wanted to arrest her, a brave and courageous woman. And I said months ago, keep an eye on this woman. She is going to emerge somehow. We'll see what happens. And she got the Peace Prize also, as we predicted, and she immediately dedicated the Nobel Peace Prize to President Trump. One of the reasons why mainstream media will always downplay and always come up with, whether it's negative words or negative pictures and photos of women who are small c conservative in their views, are always going to get punished by mainstream media. This is true in the United States, certainly true in Canada. Mainstream media, if you are a small c conservative woman, you're thinking about public life, just be prepared. Media is never going to say anything nice about you, so you're going to have to fight hard, work it on your own, just like Giorgio Meloni from Italy, Seki Tanaki in Japan, and Premier Daniel Smith in Alberta. They're never going to get a good break from media because they believe in things like strong families, strong communities, personal freedom, freedom of enterprise, freedom of home ownership. They believe in all those things that mainstream media dislikes. So interesting. Anyway, good for Maria Machado for winning the Nobel Prize. And I just like the look on the faces of so many of the commentators as she dedicated that Nobel Prize to President Trump. Well, in Vancouver, British Columbia, and I really don't want to be negative about my home province, but because politicians there are not being as aggressive and outspoken as they need to be about what's called the so-called Cowichan ruling, that's a ruling by a BC Supreme Court judge that has allowed members of the First Nations community, the Cowichan community, to claim ownership of a significant part of the city of Richmond. They say that the First Nations folks a few hundred years ago or hundreds of years ago, they would use that area when they were doing their fishing in the summertime, and so it's really theirs. And it has cast home ownership into huge doubt. Vancouver now, worst home sales in 2 decades. Remember, the ruling affected the city of Richmond, British Columbia, which is adjacent to Vancouver, but it's having a ripple effect right across the country. That ruling needs to be contested, and politicians, some have spoken against it, but we're seeing very little coordinated effort even across the country, which literally could turn the issue of home ownership upside down in Canada, which would be wonderful news to all the socialists and the leftists. They love that thought, but of course it would completely destroy the country. Well, another country in the frozen north that's getting a lot of attention is Greenland. And at Mar-a-Lago, I met some people from Greenland, also representatives from Norway, and I basically was saying, hey, what is the deal? Do you people, remember there's only 50,000 people on that island. Do you want to become part of the United States? Do you not? And the point that he made was the Greenlanders are the ones who are going to decide. There was legislation that was passed, overviewed and overseen by Denmark back in 2008, which gives them the opportunity to do a little bit like Albertans are wanting to do, and that's to determine their own destiny. Do they want to be their own standalone nation? Do they want to maintain a relationship with Denmark? So all you people who are saying Trump is going to invade and the U.S. are going to invade, the U.S. is not going to invade. And I say to the people of Greenland, you're in a great position, a great bargaining position. Sure, allow the U.S. to build certain strategic military outlets on Greenland, early warning systems to be installed there to warn against nuclear attack, etc. You Greenlanders, you're in the driver's seat. You get to control your future and say what that is. And so let's let Greenlanders decide. And folks, don't worry, the Marines are not going to be swarming onto the frozen shores of beautiful Greenland. Well, the level, the epidemic, explosive nuclear level of fraud that continues to just blast out of the state of Minnesota. Now more and more fraud in government spending in the state of California. We're talking in the billions and billions of dollars of the most outrageous fraud, the expense of government money that was never picked up by the public auditors. And I'm saying this, that I've said this before, there's going to be a new breed of possibilities for auditors. This would be forensic type auditors who do random audits and who do the type of things that so far mainstream media is not following up the fraud at all. It's largely been exposed by these young entrepreneurial reporters. They actually go to the places where the money is apparently supposed to be spent and find out it's not being spent at all, and places don't even exist. So it's these young entrepreneurial journalists, which is the reason some of the mainstream media don't like largely reporting on it, because they were not interested. They totally let these governments get away with financial murder, and they do that because mainstream media does not like to criticize left-leaning governments, be that Democrats, NDP, or socialists around the world. Well, the China mineral policy that we were just talking about, it has in fact given China a huge financial monopoly when it comes to the provision of rare minerals, as they're called, special minerals for all kinds of technological development and progress. And is it because these minerals can only be found in China? No, they can be found in other countries also. But so many countries have gone to extreme regulatory efforts to shut down any kind of mining at all because, of course, as environmentalists tell us, the world is coming to an end next week at 9 p.m., 9:30 in Newfoundland. And this is this is one of the reasons you don't get healthy, safe exploration going on to the degrees that it should in other countries, because other democratic countries, Canada included, put hugely expensive and many times not necessary regulations when it comes to the development, the processing of the products that will keep our environment clean. That includes refined oil products. And that's why China continues to enjoy that type of stranglehold on these products. They could be being produced in other countries. Well, the U.S. economy is continuing to bump upwards and becoming more and more vibrant. A couple of things that have been done that, again, mainstream media won't report on because they're positive. The establishment of what's called birth accounts. This is everybody who's born in the United States gets, and I believe the level right now is $1,000 put into an account. And anybody can add to that account for the child. The parents can add to it. It's tax-free. Grandparents can add to it. And depending whether you just leave it there and it increases in interest, but the young person can then extract that when they are 18 years old. They're going to have a fair bit of change, a good chunk of change there to do things with, whether it's go to college or maybe look at putting a down payment on the house. So the birth account, an incredible measure that other countries might want to be looked at in terms of increasing hope and the future for young people. Interesting also, there's a proposal on the issue of affordability when it comes to homes. In the United States, they have something called 401ks. Those are retirement saving plans. They would be the equivalent to an RRSP in Canada, roughly equivalent, and similar ones around the world. And what the United States is looking at right now is the ability of people to draw from that account before they retire if they're going to be using it for a down payment on a home or to purchase a home. So interesting stimulation of the economy coming from what is largely without having to hit taxpayers with more and more borrowing and more plans from government. Let private sector money continue to fuel the economy. Talking about private sector money and fueling, sadly to say, another expose on even more illegal gambling in the NBA and basketball, at the NBA level and at the college level, and players being paid by people who set up gambling houses, thousands and thousands of dollars per game to, as they call it, throw a game or just shave a few points off. So there might be a star who would be, expected he's going to get maybe 20 points in a particular game. And the betting, you get a betting saying, no, we think he's going to get no more than 10. That would be a pretty healthy bet. And the star being paid to do what he can to just miss that basket by inches each time. And it's called shaving points or point shaving. It's an epidemic that's being discovered in the national, in the NBA, and even in college sports. So hopefully they can get a handle on that. You'd think these players are making enough money, but apparently not. But it's going to destroy the game. So hopefully they can get a handle on that. On the kind of a funny issue coming out here of the game Jeopardy in May. In Jeopardy, there was a Canadian player, and this was a graduate from UBC, University of British Columbia in Canada, in Vancouver. And he openly admitted, he wasn't working yet, still living in his folks' basement. And as you know, young men, there seems to be a bit of a trend for that. And he turned the thing around before anybody could call him lazy or living in the basement. He says, no, he's a new type of person, and he's calling himself a stay-at-home son. He's a stay-at-home son, so he's using positive language to describe the fact he's enjoying living at home rent-free. Listen, I think it's great when sons or daughters want to stay with their parents, stay in the home. We've always had that policy. But if you were going to stay, you had to pay. So stay-at-home sons or daughters, stay, but be prepared to pay. In the 2026 Religious Persecution World Watch list has come out identifying religious persecution against Christians being the religion that is the most persecuted against, even including deadly results of persecution. 388 million people this year, 388 million people experiencing outright religious discrimination, persecution, I should say, persecution. This isn't just people under pressure or people who, are not liked because they're Christians, but in 50 countries, and North Korea and Somalia leading the countries in terms of viciousness against Christians. And of course, that bleeds over into not from persecution, but discrimination. And that takes all kinds of shapes and forms in Western society and our universities and the workplace, where Christians are punished for any kind of discussion about their faith. Well, Some mainstream media also is always soft on reporting persecution, but Canada's CBC, the taxpayer-funded network in Canada, there is a gentleman who was a high-ranked employee at CBC, and he's taking CBC to court. He's accusing them of persecution and discrimination, and that was resulting in his time working in CBC offices and studios in the north in Canada, in the far north. And he's saying that there was very clearly a do not hire list. These are allegations, a do not hire list against First Nations, against Indigenous, against Blacks. He said level of discrimination was fierce, that people lived in fear working in those areas, and so much so that in the studios in the north, the CBC had even designated for employees who were feeling picked upon or feeling that management was being too tough on them, there is a designated crying room. Yes, a crying room. So share your tears, share your fears, do it right here, and stay tuned. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you tomorrow. Bye now.